National Treasury, who's here on the two bills before us. And as I understand it, we've got at least one obvious apology, which comes from our chairperson, who we must convey good wishes to for a speedy recovery. We're very sorry she's not well. Secondly, are there any other apologies you have, my friend?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Chairperson, and honorable members and colleagues on the platform. Yes, there are two more apologies: an apology from Honorable Ryder and Honorable Mamarachane. Thank you, Chair. So,
not well as well. And then Dennis is somewhere in Germany, I think, for some study tour of the Joint Defense Committee. Yeah, okay, good. Both are legitimate apologies. We then move on to responses by National Treasury on public submissions. First, we'll deal with the Appropriation Bill and then the Eskom debt relief. We got the PowerPoint presentation yesterday. I just want to ask Lubabalo, well, let me ask them actually. It's a question that, is really for the committee to decide. So as far as I can tell, Treasury, how much time would you need? Is 45 minutes okay, or do you want an hour since there are two bills? How much time would you want? Who's leading the team?
Good morning, Person. This is Mampo Modise. I will be leading the team. I think 45 minutes will be sufficient for us.
Okay, let's go for it. We all got the PowerPoint presentation. I browsed through it this morning in anticipation I might have to chair. And in any case, I catch up during meetings. But when you're a chair, you have to be more, let's say, prepared. So I regret, committee members, you know this full well. I couldn't be here last week for the reasons that I've already explained in the chat group, right? And while I'm with you, I need to tell you the Finance Committee. Next week also, I'm taking part in some conference in KZN. And I won't be here for next week. Either Zolani and Kiva will be chairing the public hearings on Tuesday. But these are all approved or about to be approved by the Chief Whip. And there is part of my social and broader political responsibilities. Okay, shall we go on then? Over to you. Treasury, let's start. Yep.
I'm here. Thank you so much. As I said, this is Mampo Modis, and I hope Lubabalo can flight the presentation for us. So basically, we have collected most of the recommendations and noted the submissions that were made by the different stakeholders. And what we have here, Chairperson and honorable members, is just to summarize those responses. And I will be joined with my chief directors in public finance and in the budget office. They will introduce themselves as they respond. And then once we finish public finance with the appropriation bill, then the team from asset and liability management.
Yes, go ahead, please. Are you there, Mampo?
There were recommendations that were additional budget requests. Chair, can I go ahead?
Yes, please do. I don't intervene. I mean, you just go ahead and manage your team. And then when you finish the first one, colleagues, can we get some advice here? Do we want to treat them separately or deal with them both together? What's the advice for members? I don't have a strong view on it. Who's saying what? Any hands up, Lubabalo?
Yes, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson and members. I think, Chair, it will be better to deal with one bill at a time because they are not interrelated.
Right. Yeah, I also agree with that. Yeah. Okay, fine. No, I agree with that. You're right. Let's go ahead. Nobody's saying anything otherwise. Good. Let's go ahead, please.
Yeah, so basically the first set of recommendations were recommendations on additional budget allocations, and that was mainly for the presidential unit interventions, additional funding for the departments that experience some of the financial pressures, especially for programs that have been underfunded in the past. There were also recommendations on accountability by different departments, and also there has been a lot of comments on corruption and wasteful expenditure and what we're doing with that. So basically, most of the the recommendations on the budget process, or on the additional funding, will definitely incorporate those recommendations when we run the budget process that's going to start next month or tomorrow in June. And basically, we will be presenting those recommendations together with other contributions that we will get from departments to INCOMPAD and to Cabinet. And the outcome of that process will then be presented by the Minister in October. The accountability of departments, I think we note the recommendations, and of course, we support the committees to ensure oversight and hold departments responsible. And on corruption and wasteful expenditure, Dr. Rendani will give the committee a flavor of the allocations that we proposing and that Parliament has. We're basically putting in the bill for your consideration so that you can at least have a feel of the proposed allocations to try and fight corruption and to capacitate the different institutions that are responsible for dealing with corruption. So, Chairperson, let me ask Marumo to quickly just go through the recommendations or the responses by National Treasury on the wage agreement. Marumo, are you there?
Yes, Dr. Mampo, and good morning to the Honorable Chairperson, Honorable members, the colleagues, and any other persons that are on the platform. My name is Marumo Mage from the Treasury. As Dr. Mampo has already indicated, I'll take the submissions relating to the wages and remunerations and headcounts. The first submission was in relation to the suggestion that was made that perhaps there is a need for a single wage regime as well as collective bargaining processes for national, provinces, SOEs and entities. And as in our as a response as the Treasury, I mean we are in an agreement in principles, but perhaps we are saying that the issue is not much about bringing all these entities and national and provinces into a single bargaining process, but rather the need for the realignment of the mandating processes at a state level, to ensure that the manner in which we deal with the salaries with wages and wage increases, becomes fair and equitable across all levels or all institutions of the state. So I think we are in agreement, but with the issues of aligning the mandating processes, and in terms of the single wage regime. We are also in agreement that perhaps we need to review the entire public sector remuneration, I think, which is a project that is currently underway and led by the DPSA, and with the view that or the idea that the state should move to a single public sector remuneration framework. That will regulate all government employees and ensure that there is fairness in the manner in which the public servants in general are remunerated. So that work is led by the DPSA. It's ongoing. They are doing it in phases, and I think once it's concluded, we'll be able to get a much better view and guidance in terms of how we can move with this process. And the idea there is to target the state-owned entities that rely mainly on transfers from the state. So that process it's currently underway, and it will be able to guide us in designing this new remuneration framework. And then the other suggestion or the other view that was submitted was that we should reduce the packages of politicians as well as the managers in the public sector. And I must say, in principle, as the Treasury, we agree with all suggestions or views or initiatives that have been submitted to us that will be able to help us realize savings as well as and help in managing the sustainability of our public finances. I mean, but I must indicate that some of these things, I mean, comes with their own complexities. I mean, they are not as easy as they are presented. I mean, I will start with the remunerations of politicians. I mean, Treasury has got no jurisdictions over the wage settings of public office bearers, including political office bearers. I mean, because that is managed in terms of 219 of the constitutions, which requires that legislation be passed, and that legislation must establish an independent commission. I mean, that must do its research and make recommendations on those remunerations. And that commission currently it does exist, which is the independent commission for remuneration of public office bearers, and the commission makes recommendations to the president concerning those salaries and allowances. And as a treasurer, we participate because the commission does consult with the Minister of Finance. I mean, we does participate through that process by expressing our views in terms of the proposals that they are making. And also, once the commission made the submission to the president also does consult with the Minister of Finance, and we also make our view in terms of those processes. But it's not as an area where we could just say we agree and we go and reduce the salary of politicians, because we don't really have jurisdiction over that. In terms of other benefits, I mean, currently the ministerial handbook, I think the president ordered that it should be reviewed, and the DPSA is leading that process. And as the National Treasury, I mean, our role there is to determine the price threshold of official vehicles. And I must indicate that, I mean, since 2019, I mean, we've managed to keep that price constant as a way of managing and restricting expenditure relating to those benefits. And we've put in place transversal contracts to ensure that the 800,000 could still be applicable, and in buying some of those cars that are suitable for the executive. So that is our main role as far as this space is concerned. Then in terms of the managers, I mean, as I said, I mean, we do agree with any initiatives that will result in us realizing some savings, but I must indicate that even with regard to the salaries of managers, I mean, it will not be easy to just go and reduce the salaries of senior managers in the public service, in local government, and then also even in entities without looking at the entire remuneration framework, because the salaries are interlinked to each other. I mean, the salaries of the managers are interlinked to the salaries of the non-senior managers. I mean, if I can give an example, in the public service, I mean, the gap between the salary of a level 12, which is a non-senior manager, and a level 13, which is the starting point of the senior managers, the gap is not that huge. So meaning that if we go and reduce the salaries of a director, the chances are that, in fact, not the chances, I mean, then the salaries will get to a position where the salaries of deputy directors will overshoot and overlap those of the directors. In fact, I think in the local government space, we did find ourselves in that position where we were even forced to go and review the salaries of senior managers in certain categories, because the bargain council employees' salaries have been increasing at a higher rate than that of the senior managers. And consequently, what happened is that then there was that overlapping that we started experiencing. So as much as we agree with this recommendation, but the recommendation will have far-reaching consequences for the entire remuneration structures, meaning that we'll have to go back to even the bargain council and start there and negotiate with the unions for this reduction before you even think about reducing the packages of the senior managers on the other side. And then moving on to the next submission. There was also a submission that we should do a physical head count to identify ghost employees. I think we do agree with these initiatives. And in fact, we've already engaged with our counterparts, DPSA, that perhaps such a project should be initiated where we go through a personal cleanup and try to ensure that all employees that are on the system can be able to be accounted for. But I must indicate that, I mean, a project of this or an initiative of this nature has been implemented in the past by some provinces. KZN did it in education, and Limpopo. During the time of Section 100, it was done in health and education through State SA. I think in Gauteng, they did introduce some initiative, biometrics initiative in health to try and make sure that everyone is accounted for. And I must indicate that, I mean, it doesn't seem like there were major problems that were detected there. So I don't think there were a lot of people that were identified as ghosts, I mean, from this process. But I think, yeah, we take the recommendation, and we will try and see if whether, I mean, we can implement it in the medium to long term and ensure that, I mean, we are able to account for each and every person that is on the system. I think those were the questions, Chair and Dr. Mampo. Thank you. I'll move on. I'll hand over to my next colleague. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members.
Progress.
FATF included in there. In our last engagement, Honorable Ocamp asked about funding allocated for the specialized prosecutors from the private sector to deal with complex cases. Out of that 1.3 billion, 750 million is for those prosecutors. We call them Section 38 in terms of the NPA Act. And the second recommendation by the Public Service Accountability Monitor was for the committees to compel National Treasury to review the SIU, the Special Investigating Unit funding model, to ensure it is fully funded and able to deliver on its mandate. We have been engaging with the SIU. We have considered several options, one of which is this one recommended by the Public Service Accountability Monitor. And we came to the conclusion that the current funding model, which is a hybrid model, which is a combination of the appropriation and the fee that they charge to the client's department that they investigate. We support the current funding model. And again, it must be noted that at the end of March 22, the National Treasury approved that an amount of 921 million can be retained by the Special Investigating Unit, especially to deal with the cash flow challenges that they experienced during the course of the year. And linked to that, this current budget made a recommendation that 100 million be allocated to the SIU for the implementation of State Capture Commission recommendation. And the other recommendation by the Public Service Accountability Monitor was that given underspending by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, funds should be reallocated to the SIU. And considering that we have approved that almost $1 billion can be retained by the Special Investigating Unit. From where we are sitting for now, we don't see any pressures. However, there's an option that should savings be realized on the justice vote and SIU is in need of funding, there is a legal provision that allows for the increase of the transfer payments to the SIU. And the other recommendation by the Public Service Accountability Monitor was that the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council should receive adequate funding to ensure sustainability. We note the recommendation. However, it should be noted that the bulk of the work is done by the relevant government department responsible for the implementation of the various pillars of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. In addition, these are early days because this advisory council was appointed sometimes last year in August and we haven't been engaged, but should the need arise, hopefully the presidency will engage us and then it will be dealt with as part of the budget process going forward. Next slide. And lastly, there was the issue of police numbers. The headcount, a concern that the headcount decline is declining from 208 to 172 personnel. It must be noted that the current budget as tabled provides 7.8 billion in the next 3 years for the appointment of 15,000 police personnel. I think I should also clarify that in the current financial year, 10,000 will be trained and ultimately absorbed. The other 5,000, it's coming from the previous allocation, which was done in the 2022 MTF. I think this concludes my inputs. I will now hand over to my colleague, Julia, to deal with the issues raised.
Good morning, Chairperson and honourable members. I'm dealing with education and related sectors. There were 3 issues raised at the hearing. The first one from Equal Education, that the National Treasury should adopt a human rights approach to budgeting that prioritizes socioeconomic rights like basic education. Over 60% of total non-interest spending is allocated over the MTF to the social wage. So that's 60% of the total budget. That includes both national and provinces. For community development, employment programs, health, education, and social protection. So this is indeed an indication that the budget does prioritize socioeconomic issues. There was a question, I think, from 2 members of the Standing Committee, of the Select Committee on Appropriation, that spoke to why is higher education allocated 3 times as much as basic education. The appropriation bill, honourable members, only reflects the proposed allocation to national departments. So it is true that higher education is allocated almost 3 times. Its allocation is 110.8 billion, whereas that of the National Department of Basic Education is 31.8 billion. But basic education is mainly delivered by the 9 provincial departments of basic education. And if you add up their budgets, you get a total proposed allocation of 277.8 billion for 23-24. However, the point that the honourable members made was also in relation to spending per learner. So in the higher education sector, it's roughly about 64,800 per student, which is more or less 3 times that, more than that of basic education, which is around 22,000. But members will appreciate that it costs a lot more to train a doctor, an engineer, or a motor mechanic than it would to run a school program. So it's not unusual that the cost should be higher. COSATU raised a whole range of issues around increasing allocations. One of them, which falls in this portfolio, is the CCMA. They indicated that the CCMA is struggling with case backlogs, yet its budget has not increased much to keep up with the increased demand. This has been a recommendation in previous years, and in the previous MTF, the 2022 MTF, an additional 120 million was allocated to the CCMA to help with the increasing caseload. For the information of the members, the proposed transfer to the CCMA for 2023-24 is 1.05 billion rand. Thanks.
So good morning, Chairperson and honourable members. This is Ulrika Britton. I'll be taking you through some of the built environment issues and network industry issues that was raised in the public consultation process.
Sorry, can I just ask, are you quite distant from the mic? Because there's it's like you're in a basement, you know. I'm sure
Is that better,
there's like
Chair?
a slight echo. Okay, slightly better. Let's go for it. I mean, it's not your fault. Yeah. Okay.
So the issues that was raised in relation to my clusters don't directly relate to the bill, but they do have broader fiscal implications. So the first one was raised by COSATU in relation to the road accident benefit scheme. We support this proposal that the bill is retabled, Chair, just simply because the policy proposals around the road accident benefit scheme shifts the kind of the broader fundamentals from a liability insurance scheme to one that is based on social security principles that we hope would allow for a more equitable, a more affordable, and a more sustainable mechanism to support road accident victims. In relation to the recapitalization of state-owned companies, one of the key requirements that we have for departments to motivate for funding for state-owned companies is that we have a turnaround plan. The reason why kind of these entities find themselves in difficult financial positions would be because their costs exceed their revenue, which means that they run into some kind of operating deficit, and if they don't have surpluses to finance those deficits, they become they go into financial distress. But turnaround plans also means that we have to look at strategies to review costs and the cost structure, and whether that cost structure is uncompetitive, and how we are able to then streamline and increase revenue to improve profitability that would reduce their reliance on the fiscus. But sometimes it does mean that things like organizational restructuring needs to take place, and where excess does exist, that gets rationalized. And if we want to put these state-owned companies on a sustainable path, we have to allow them to do so. So this is really just in relation to, so for example, the post office, where part of its turnaround plan is that they would have to retrench people. But on the one hand, we say that we shouldn't allow them to do that. But by keeping that on means that when your business doesn't allow for this, you become inefficient, and you don't remain profitable. With that also, it then also means that the reliance on the fiscus would then continue into the future. The FFC and Youth Capital both raised issues around expanding infrastructure investments. So we have the consolidated, including public state-owned companies. We have about 900 billion rands worth of infrastructure investment that we expect to happen over the 2023 MTF. The largest of that, of course, would be on the balance sheets of Eskom and Transnet. One of the key pillars on why we think that these investments are important relates to economic infrastructure that not only helps with increasing aggregate demand in the short term, so during construction, but also improves the supply side capacity in the economy. So by having kind of better performing harbors and functioning road network and a functioning rail system means that increased productivity from farms and factories are able to then get to the harbor and can get to markets. And that's really the economic benefit over the long term, and our infrastructure investments lie into that. The FFC was particularly concerned around the declining shares of local government and provincial government capital investment as a percentage of total capital investment by the public sector. And we should all be worried about that. So some of the fastest growing expenditure items in the budget relates to transfers that we do make to provinces and municipalities. I mean, the local government equitable share is one of the fastest growing expenditure items that we have in the budget. And yet we see this declining spend on fixed investment. It does suggest that there is a shift from capital to operations. We see that in provinces too. The largest provincial spending on the capex is in provincial roads, that is supplemented through the provincial roads maintenance grant. But so what we're seeing is that provinces are not spending as much as they should be, or that there are other operational pressures within provincial and local government budgets that's seeing a decline in capital expenditure in those areas. For municipalities, it's particularly concerning given that these are tradable services where matters related to the pricing of water and sanitation services, electricity services, does help finance this and does provide for a sustainable financing mechanism over the life to do all of this. I think that is all from me. Thank you. Chairperson.
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members. My name is Gillian Wilson, Chief Director, Public Finance, responsible for Administrative Services Department. I just want to raise a few issues that was raised by COSATU regarding Home Affairs. The first issue that was raised, there's a reduction in the baseline of 0.8% in the baseline of the department, and that could impact on service delivery. They also raised a concern around the lack of staff to deliver frontline services. As our response, there were no reduction in the baseline of Home Affairs. We did a function shift from the department's baseline to the Border Management Authority. The Border Management Authority was incubated in the department for 3 years prior to the entity becoming independent. So the Border Management Authority was established as an independent entity on 1st April 2023. There was also concern raised around the funding available for political parties, the lack of funding that's there. Our response is that political parties receive funding from Parliament for constituency work in various areas. There's also funds in the provinces that political parties can access. There's a multi-party democracy fund administered by the IEC, but did not have any success to attract funding from the private sector. We also have a baseline for political parties also in the IEC, and we assess that baseline on a continuous basis. So we will also do so to see during this intake whether there's a shortfall in the funding for political parties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mampo, who's next?
Chair.
Oh, there we are. Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Leboha Madiba. I'm from the National Treasury. I'm the Chief Director for Economic Services. I'm responsible for budget-related matters for departments in the economic cluster, amongst others. There were questions from two stakeholders, which are COSATU and Youth Capital. So the question from the three questions from COSATU, the first one being that government needs to provide assurance that the government-owned money to workers at Denel will now be paid. We can safely confirm that all the outstanding salaries that were owed to employees of Denel were paid off by the end of October 2022, after Denel realized about 992 million from the Denel Medical Benefit Trust. Another question from COSATU was that more needs to be done by law enforcement to protect the railway infrastructure. As government, we are already collaborating with Transnet as part of the protection of critical infrastructure strategy. Transnet has also developed partnership with the private sector to address cable theft and vandalism on the freight rail network through the use of advanced technologies and additional security personnel. In 2020, government announced measures targeted at restricting trade in scrap metal to limit damage to public infrastructure. One of the recommendations proposed the establishment of a metal trade task force that will work with specialized multidisciplinary economic infrastructure tax team. Further to say is that Critical Infrastructure Protection Act number 8 of 2019, amongst other, provides for measures to be put in place for the protection, safeguarding and resilience of critical infrastructure. It also establishes the Critical Infrastructure Council
comprising of the Department of Defense, Department of Home Affairs, Department of Public Works, National Disaster Management Center, South African Local Government Association, and the South African Police and the State Security Agency. There's also the National Rail Crime Combating Forum, which